So today's discussion, we want to focus on your questions about spirits specifically. So that's our point of today's discussion. And also want to talk a little bit, before we begin the question session, about how spirits are hooking into your emotions. Because as many of you are growing with your mediumship and healing capacities, some of you are noticing more and more spirit influence in your lives. And some of you are getting quite concerned about it. And I noticed too that some of you are even concerned about dealing with any emotions because you're worried that you might finish up attracting some spirits who then make the whole situation worse for you. And so I noticed that quite a few people have voiced that concern with me as well. So what we'd like to do today is just talk a little more about how spirits are attracted to you, what they're hanging around you for, and why certain emotions that you have will definitely connect with them in a much stronger way than other emotions that you have. Does that sound all right? And then we'd like to open it up to have a discussion and your questions as well.
I think there's a small person who wants to contribute to the discussion today. Would you like to...
I'm not sure if she does. I asked her earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. No. Fair enough.
Yep.
Sorry,
because what happened was, I'll just relate something in a general sense, and that is a little girl who sometimes comes to our sessions said to her mummy, said to her quite a number of times that there's often a monster behind her. Have you heard that from your own children at times? Like, yeah? And this little girl gets very frightened and describes the monster to mummy. Like, and do you want to talk about it, Sienna? You can talk about it if you want. No, she's all right. So what happens is that the monster is all purple and sort of grey and brown and purple, and he's got horns. And now, as a child describes that to you, you'd think, nah, that's a bit strange, like, that might be just their imagination or something. But actually, this is the way that many spirits who are in dark locations portray themselves to children. Right? And the reason why they do that is because they're attracted to the fear of the child, and then they want to use that fear of both the parent and the child in order to get a hook into the child. And what I'd like to do is just describe to you how to handle some of those kind of situations as well. It's quite simple actually, handling those situations. Many of you are frightened of malevolent spirits. So if you think of malevolent spirits, they are the spirits who want to harm you. They're the ones who want to scare you or be angry with you or try to assist you to do things that you don't want to do or that you feel you don't want to do. And those malevolent spirits have a purpose in most cases of connecting with us in some way. Now, unfortunately on the planet, almost every mental illness is related to these spirits and what they're trying to do on the planet in terms of connection with people. And so what happens is we notice how some people seem to have a connection, and then they have a certain experience that's frightening to observe. Do you mind me mentioning your experience, Liz? And the last time we were here doing a spirit session, at lunchtime, it was during the break, wasn't it? The 3 o'clock break. Liz had this emotional thing that happened, and some of you saw that, right? And some of you got really frightened about that, right, as to what was going on. Now, you started off, Liz, didn't you, feeling an emotion. You thought you were in an emotion, you started crying, you were feeling some grief. And then all of a sudden, what happened then? Can you remember even what happened really?
I was in the emotion and I felt like I was doing really well, and then I think I shut down and because I felt my breathing went funny and I was breathing in through my throat.
Right.
And because I had come from Pentecostal circles, when spirits come out, and I often wondered if I had a spirit, that they'd scream when they come out, and I had this overwhelming feeling I wanted to scream. So I said, okay, well, this is actually wants to come out. So I actually allowed the spirit to do that, and I actually allowed the whole process. Now knowing what I know, that it actually just took over me then after that. So I actually...
the act of you stepping back from your emotion and allowing this process to happen because it was a part of your background religiously, just allowed these spirits then to basically take over, and they were in a convulsive state actually, weren't they? They were sort of shaking and convulsing. You fell on the floor, and do you remember how I got you to come back? It was quite simple, wasn't it?
You just called my name.
So all I just went in and whispered in Liz's ear, just come back, Liz. Come back here, Liz. Come back here, Liz. And I only said that 4 or 5 times, and Liz then became present again and then realised what happened.
Can I just say, AJ, I'm not actually afraid of that, because I know that I actually allowed the whole process to happen.
Yeah.
And now that, like I said, know what I know, that it wouldn't happen again like that.
Exactly. But there are a lot of other persons who saw it that are very afraid still, and that's what I'm trying to address. Their fear, not yours.
I'm just trying to allay their fears. That I had control over that, but it was...
I don't want you to allay their fears at all. Because remember, we want to deal with their fears. You remember the homework that you had last time? What was the homework you had, for those of you who are mediums? To scare yourself silly and just let yourself start connecting with some of the fears that you have, right? Remember that? How many of you actually have tried that during the month? Right, just a few, yeah, okay. And how many of you did it with earth change stuff and actually connected with things? How many of you actually connected with something when you did it with earth change stuff? So a few of you. How about those who did it with spirit stuff? You remember I said to the mediums, the healers do that? Yeah. And how many of you actually connected with fears related to that? Oh, that's good, that's good. So there's a bit of fear processing going on during the month. There's not enough fear processing going on. These fears have a huge effect on your life and your interactions with everything around you, including the spirits with you. And your fear, your unresolved fear, is what gets you into your rage and anger. And this is something that needs to be addressed, because when you're in a state of anger or rage, you are in the most heightened state that a spirit can actually connect to you with. All right? So it's actually, if you're looking at what is the most dangerous thing for you, and I'm not talking about feeling your anger and rage as an experience, I'm talking about projecting your anger and rage to others. Remember, there's a difference between being in the emotion and experiencing it and releasing it, and living in the emotion permanently. There's a big difference between those two states. So what I'm talking about is when you live in your fear rather than releasing it, you will always get into anger at different places. And when you live in your anger and rage and project it at others, in other words, yell and scream at your wife or your husband or your children, or something that's happening around you, when you're in that place, what is happening is you are also in a heightened place where spirits can now connect with you to a greater degree. Now, the type of spirit that wants to connect with you is the spirit who has exactly the same type of emotion inside of them. And not only do they have exactly the same type of emotion, but where they are, they can't seem to have it fulfilled. Now, when you're in a state of rage or anger, what's the thing that you want to fulfill? You want to break things, don't you? You don't mind about even breaking people at that point, do you really? You don't mind about breaking relationships. A few plates in your hand, well, they're goners, aren't they? Off they go. So you want to break everything when you're in that state. And you see, in the spirit world, people who are in this terrible rage have nothing to break. The things they're angry about are all not there with them, but they're in this rage still. So what happens is they get immediately attracted back to earth and to somebody who's in that state, and they heighten that state to get rid of some of their own frustration. Does that make sense? To get rid of some of their own angers and frustration. Now that is a very dangerous place for you. Because in that place, you now have maybe 1, 2, 5, 10, you could have even a group of them, all influencing you. How do you think a lot of these horrific murders that occur? We have this thing called, now on earth, temporary insanity, where a person's temporarily seemingly insane and they go and do something and then they come to reality and they're guilt-ridden because of what they did. How do you think that state happened? It happened through this connection with spirits, right? And so it's so important for you to own your emotion rather than live in these states of fear and anger. And this is why I've been so focused on it in the last few months with you, getting you through this phases. Remember, like yesterday when we talked to a few of the people who come up the front to be talked with, remember that a number of them went firstly through this real big anger phase, maybe even for a year long of anger phase. And then they went into this fear phase for sometimes up to a year long as well. And then they started getting into their deeper emotions, right? Now, while you're in the anger phase and while you're in the fear phase, they are the most dangerous times for you. Not only for you in terms of spiritually, but because you could easily just walk away from the path of truth in that moment, but also dangerous for you physically. Because if you've got some spirits around you egging you on and you're not resolving the underlying emotional reason why they can egg you on and help you do things, then you can get into a pretty bad place pretty quickly. It's in those times that relationships get destroyed, you know, things get destroyed, and even we might even have self-harm type emotions that come up that attract these spirits who are in self-harm, and where we actually finish up doing something to ourselves as well. Now, those states are states that can happen but don't have to. During that period of time, we can also do things like drink heavily, for example. So you know how all of a sudden we feel like, oh, I've got to have a drink, and then, you know, as soon as you have the one drink, you've got all of these other spirits angry. So some of you have had that experience. You've had that experience where do you want me to say what your experience was? Okay. What happened was sitting around a group of women, everyone's drinking. You know, the women, one of the women, mum, and drinking, and I've got issues with women being the son of mum, you know, and got injuries particularly with mum, and then there's these other women all drinking as well. Now, what happens? They're all drinking, and all of a sudden, whoosh, all these other spirits come in. All these women spirits surround the women who are drinking, and all the men spirits surround the man who's drinking, and before you know it, there's an event into a rage, and before you know it, break something, and then somebody calls the police, and before you know it, you're whacked in jail. Yeah? And then you come to and you realise, wow, like, that all happened. Why? Because all this unresolved emotion that's going on inside of myself that I don't own, and so then I feel like I need to have a drink to calm everything down. I have a drink, before I know it now I'm being influenced by spirits to actually go and act out my rage rather than deal with my underlying grief. Now these events happen on a moment by moment. You have a look at the world around you. They're happening all the time. You go down the street at Malevolent on a Saturday night. They're happening all the time. Right? You can see the Spirit's connection. Many of you, now that you've been developing a little with regard to mediumship, many of you have been noticing spirits a lot more, haven't you? Some of you, I heard, are even seeing them now. Like, didn't you say earlier, Liz, I overheard a conversation where you said how you're driving along a road or something and someone walked into a semi or something and then walked through it. And then you realised you were seeing a spirit, another person. Yeah. And so a lot of you are starting to have these things open up for you. And you can also sense when people are being influenced by spirits a lot now. You notice that? You can see the change in them, can't you? You can see, I'm talking to a normal person, I'm talking to the normal person I remember, and wow, now I'm not talking to the normal person, I seem to be talking to somebody else now. What's going on there? And that's where the spirit is now overcloaked, connected with the emotion. And now I'm talking to a combination of their unhealed emotion and that spirit's unhealed emotion talking through them. Now these are all going to be issues, obviously, as you progress on the divine love path. Because as you progress on the divine love path, all of these natural mediumistic tendencies that we all have start opening up, and everything starts getting more powerful for us, and we start opening up all of these different senses, the sense of sight, of seeing spirits, hearing them, feeling them.